Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to crack the code of the IELTS Speaking Part 1. We've got an awesome guide here, chock full of tips and tricks to help you nail that first impression with the examiner.
Yeah, the IELTS Speaking Part 1. It's kind of unique, isn't it?
You know what I find interesting about it? It's not about testing your knowledge on some obscure topic.
Right.
It's more about just showing you can handle those everyday conversations in English, right?
Exactly. Think of it like a warm-up chat, just a casual conversation, but with the scoring system.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, got to strike that balance, not too short, not too long, right?
Yeah.
And our guide here actually emphasizes this sweet spot for answer length, which I think is really interesting. What does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, well, one of the key takeaways here is something called the DEE format. It stands for direct answer, expand, example.
I like it.
So imagine you're asked, do you enjoy cooking? Now, you could just say yes, but that's a bit like, a dead end.
Right.
It doesn't really give the examiner much to work with.
Yeah, it's like conversation over.
Exactly. So instead, using this DE format, you would say something like, yes, especially trying out new recipes. I find it very relaxing.
Oh, okay.
So you see how that expands on your answer and kind of keeps things flowing, right?
Yeah, totally. It adds that extra depth. But wouldn't that kind of sound, I don't know, a bit formulaic if you're always using that DEE format?
Well, not if you do it naturally, right?
Mm-hmm.
The key is to sound enthusiastic and engaged. Think of it like building a bridge,
Oh.
Each part of your answer, the direct answer, the expansion, and the example, those are like the planks of the bridge, connecting smoothly and taking the listener, the examiner, on a journey with you.
I like that.
Yeah.
So it's not just about following a rigid structure. It's more about using that structure to showcase your fluency and how you can express yourself. Makes sense. Now, our guide also mentions these key areas: fluency, coherence, vocabulary, and grammar.
Yeah, those are important.
They sound pretty important, but they can also sound a bit intimidating.
Definitely. But let's break them down, and I think they'll be a little less scary, a little more manageable. So, fluency.
Right.
A lot of people think it means speaking quickly, right?
Yeah, really fast.
Right. But it's more about the rhythm and the pauses. Think about when you're telling a story to a friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of natural fluency you want. Engaging the listener, just like in a normal conversation.
I get it. So fluency is about the flow. Now, what about coherence? It sounds kind of like a fancy academic word.
Uh-huh. It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a simple concept. It basically means your ideas stick together logically so the listener can easily follow along.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. Each sentence is like a building block. If they're arranged well, you create a strong, understandable structure.
Got it. So fluency is the flow, and coherence is about the structure. Now, what about vocabulary? Is it all about using big, impressive words?
Well, not necessarily. While a strong vocabulary is definitely an asset, it's more about using a variety of words appropriately and, avoiding repetition.
Yeah, okay.
I think of it like cooking. You wouldn't use the same spice in every dish.
Right.
Variety makes things interesting.
Oh, I like that analogy. It's about spicing up your language, keeping the examiner engaged. Now, finally, we have the dreaded grammar. How important is grammar, really, in Part 1?
Well, good grammar is the foundation of clear communication. It's like the glue that holds your sentences together,
Yeah.
You do want to avoid making, glaring grammatical errors. It can distract the listener and, make your speech sound less polished. But don't let the fear of making a mistake paralyze you. Focus on communicating your ideas effectively.
Right.
And the grammar will often fall into place.
That makes sense. Now that we've got a handle on these core elements, our guide actually goes into some pretty cool tricks of the trade that can really boost your confidence and help you stand out. What are some of the highlights, and how can we use them to our advantage? These tricks of the trade sound like just what we need to really ace the IELTS Speaking Part 1. So what's the first tip that jumps out at you?
Well, one that often gets overlooked is avoiding those monosyllabic answers, just saying yes or no.
Right.
Remember that tennis match analogy we used for fluency?
Yeah.
You want a good back and forth rally, not just a single hit back to your opponent.
Okay, I like that.
So instead of just saying yes to a question like, do you enjoy reading?
Yeah.
You could try expanding a bit. Something like, yes, I love getting lost in a good book. It's a great way to unwind and escape reality for a while.
Right. Give the examiner something to work with.
Exactly. Show them you can elaborate and express yourself fully.
Awesome. What's another tip we can use?
Well, think about natural phrasing. You don't want to sound like you're reciting a memorized script, right?
Yeah, definitely not.
It should feel like a natural conversation. So the goal is to speak as you would in a casual setting, but obviously with good grammar and clear pronunciation.
Got it. So it's finding that sweet spot between being conversational but still maintaining that professional touch, right?
Exactly.
Now, the guide also mentions linking words. I've always struggled with those, to be honest. Any advice on using them effectively?
Oh, linking words are great. They're like those little bridges, remember, helping connect your ideas smoothly.
Yeah.
But the key is to use them naturally. Don't force them into every sentence.
Okay, good point.
Words like because, so, however, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
those can really add that sophistication and polish to your speech.
Okay.
Like, instead of saying, I like reading, I find it relaxing, you could say, I like reading because I find it relaxing.
Oh, yeah, that flows much better.
You see. It's subtle, but it makes a difference.
It's all about the nuances. Now, we've talked about vocabulary, but the guide specifically mentions varying your vocabulary.
Right.
Is that different from just using a wide range of words?
It's related,
Yeah.
but the emphasis here is on avoiding repetition.
Mhm.
Like, imagine you're describing your hometown, right?
Okay.
And you keep using the word nice. It's a nice place, the weather's nice, the people are nice. It gets a bit boring, doesn't it?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it does.
So instead, try using synonyms like charming, pleasant, or picturesque. Add a bit more color and interest to your description.
I love that. Keep things fresh and engaging. And finally, we have pronunciation and intonation.
Yeah, those can be tricky.
They can be really intimidating, especially when you're in a high-pressure situation like the IELTS. Any tips?
Honestly, practice is key. The more you speak, the more confident you'll become.
Hmm.
Record yourself answering those part 1 questions, then listen back. Are you stressing the right words? Does your intonation sound natural? You can even practice in front of a mirror. Check your body language.
Yeah, good idea.
Because remember, your voice and your body language work together to create that positive impression.
They do. Those are great practical tips. Now, as much as we might want to believe it's all smooth sailing from here, our guide highlights some common mistakes that can really trip up even the most prepared test taker.
Oh, yeah, there are definitely some traps to avoid.
Like knowing about the potholes on a road.
Right, exactly. If you're aware of them, you can navigate around them.
Yeah.
So, what's the first danger zone we need to watch out for?
I'd say one of the biggest pitfalls is giving those overly long responses.
Okay.
Remember the sweet spot we talked about?
Yeah.
You got to find that balance, enough detail, but not overwhelming the examiner. Think quality over quantity.
So how do you know when you've crossed the line, into too much information territory?
Well, it's a bit of an art, but a good rule of thumb is to aim for answers that are about 2, maybe 3 sentences long. Enough to show off your language skills, but keep things moving.
Okay, concise and engaging. What's next?
Another common trap is using memorized answers.
Remember, the examiner's looking for spontaneity, natural communication.
Right.
If your answers sound rehearsed, it's going to raise red flags.
Yeah, that makes sense. So even if you've prepared some sample answers, you need to adapt them, make them sound genuine, right?
Absolutely. What else? Oh, rushing through your answers.
Yeah.
It's understandable. You're nervous. You want to get it over with.
Yeah, totally.
But speaking too quickly can make it hard for the examiner to understand you. And it can make you sound less confident.
Okay.
Take a breath. Slow down. Pausing to gather your thoughts is totally fine.
Makes sense.
In fact, it can make you sound more thoughtful and in control.
And it's like that saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Exactly. Taking your time can actually make you sound more fluent and confident. And finally, make sure you're actually answering the question.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds obvious, but it's easy to get flustered and go off on a tangent.
Right.
So you want to address the question directly, even if you need to rephrase it a bit to check your understanding.
Okay. Yeah.
And if you're not sure what the examiner is asking, don't be afraid to ask for clarification.
Good point.
It's much better than giving an irrelevant answer.
It shows you're engaged, actively listening. Now, we've covered a lot the structure of part 1, those essential tricks, those pitfalls to avoid. But how do we put this all into practice? Luckily, our guide has a section on just that. Practice makes perfect. What are some of the key takeaways, and how can we use them to our advantage? So we've talked about what IELTS Speaking Part 1 looks like, the tricks, the traps. But now it's time to put it all together, right?
Yeah.
The practice makes perfect part.
Yeah, that's where the real work begins.
It does. So what are some of the most effective ways to, hone our skills, build that confidence?
Well, the guide suggests 3 main things. mock practice, flashcards, and finding a speaking partner. Let's start with mock practice.
All right.
You want to try and simulate that test environment, right? So find some sample part 1 questions. You can find those online, IELTS prep books.
Right.
But don't just read through them.
Okay, yeah. What should we be doing?
You got to actually answer them out loud. Like, you can even record yourself on your phone, then listen back.
Oh, yeah. Good idea.
It might feel a bit awkward, but it's one of the best ways to spot areas you need to work on. You'll notice if you're speaking too fast, or maybe you're using the same words over and over.
Right. Right.
You'll pick up any grammar errors, too.
Yeah. It's like having your own personal coach, but without the, the big price tag. Now, what about flashcards? I remember those from, way back in school.
Right. Flashcards are great for vocab practice, brainstorming ideas.
Okay.
Write down different part 1 topics on separate cards. Things like your hobbies, travel, work, your hometown.
Good idea.
Then, shuffle the deck, pick a card at random, answer that question. That way you're not just memorizing, you're thinking on your feet.
Yeah, like a game show for IELTS prep. Love it.
Yeah.
Now, last but not least, what about speaking partners? Are they really necessary?
Well, they can be super helpful, especially if you find someone who's also prepping for the IELTS or just has a good grasp of English.
Yeah, it makes sense.
You can get feedback, you stay motivated, and it makes practice, more fun.
It's more fun to learn with someone else, right? Plus, you can bounce ideas off each other. So, any tips on finding a speaking partner?
Well, you can start by asking friends, family, classmates.
Right.
Or there are tons of online study groups, forums dedicated to the IELTS. So explore and see what works best for you.
That's great advice. We've covered so much ground today, understanding part 1, mastering those tricks, avoiding the traps. But before we wrap up, I know you have a final thought-provoking question for our listeners, something inspired by the guide's focus on, that natural communication style.
Yeah, I do. As you prepare for part 1, ask yourself this. How can I bring more of my personality into my answers?
Oh, I love that. It's not just about proving your English skills. It's about letting your authentic self shine through.
Exactly. The examiner wants to see a real person, not a robot, reciting memorized answers. So inject your perspective, your humor, your passions.
Yeah.
Let your personality sparkle.
Yeah. It's about connecting with the examiner, on a human level. And honestly, I think that's a fantastic note to end on. You've given us so much to think about, so many practical strategies to use.
Remember, you've got this. You've learned the tools.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time to practice, practice, practice.
We're so excited for you to rock that IELTS Speaking Part 1. And remember, we're always here to cheer you on in your IELTS journey. Good luck.